Good morning, everyone. My name is Wynn Goggins, and I am the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer here at the USPTO. And I want to welcome everyone, both here in person and those that are joining us online, to what is our third installment of the USPTO Speaker Series. And today's event is very, very special. It features an inspiring individual, Dr. Grandin, and she simply has an extraordinary story to tell. I know we all very much look forward to hearing from her in just a few minutes, but at this time, if you wouldn't mind placing your devices on silent. That may not be the baby. And it is now my very great pleasure to make a special introduction. He is an extraordinary leader who is making a tremendous impact on the intellectual property community and is passionate about sharing inventor stories and how their inventions are simply changing the world. In fact, today's Speaker Series event and the Speaker Series itself would not have been made possible without the passion that he has for innovation and the passion that he has for really all that we do collectively here at the USPTO. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property and the Director of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, Andre Iancu.
Thank you, Wynn, and welcome everybody. Great to see everybody here. This is indeed the third such event, and it is the largest. So good to see so many of you out here, both PTO folks, PTO employees, as well as quite a few people from the outside. And in addition to what you see here in the room, I know that we have hundreds of folks watching and listening online. That is fantastic to see. And by the way, Wynn, I think that baby was crying because they knew that I was going to speak next. But it's good that it's only the babies that are crying so far. We'll try to keep it that way. And so let's just get right to it. Obviously, aside from our main job, which is to protect intellectual property rights, I believe one of the most important things we do here at the USPTO is to tell the life-changing, history-altering, and inspiring stories of American innovation, invention, and entrepreneurship. Joining us today to share her remarkable piece of that national narrative is Dr. Grandin. Dr. Go ahead. Dr. Grandin is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University and a true pioneer in the field of improving the handling and welfare of farm animals. She earned her bachelor's degree at Franklin Pierce College and went on to earn a master's of science in animal science at the Arizona State University and later a PhD in animal science from the University of Illinois. In addition to speaking and consulting around the nation and abroad, she has written hundreds of publications, journal articles, and several books. I actually brought my books with me here today. In fact, you can join Dr. Grandin for a book signing of her book, Calling All Minds, How to Think and Create Like an Inventor, right upstairs at the National Inventors Hall of Fame Museum gift shop here at the USPTO. Dr. Grandin will be there after the event between 1 and 2 p.m. today. Please go join her. Dr. Grandin overcame many obstacles on her way to incredible success in her career. She has also written and spoken extensively. In addition to invention, innovation, and science, she's written extensively on autism, including The Autistic Brain, Thinking in Pictures, My Life with Autism, and others. She has also done extensive work in designing facilities for handling livestock, and in fact received a patent on her system for humanely preparing animals for slaughter using techniques for stunning. And for that and lots of other work, the USPTO created an inventor card for her. I have props today, Wynn. This is great. Anyway, these are hers. They were unveiled, I think, a year or two ago. Yet this morning she told me that she regrets not filing for a patent on one of her other important improvements on farm equipment, that she designed, in which nowadays roughly half the cattle in the US and Canada are handled effectively and humanely. I'm sure you'll hear much more about that in her talk in just a minute. And if that was not enough, she was also the subject of an award-winning 2010 HBO biographical drama starring Claire Danes, which illuminates Dr. Grandin's fascinating story on how autism can provide unique and beneficial ways of viewing problems, rather than the hindrance it is so often considered to be. So while the HBO film is wonderful, there is actually nothing better and more wonderful than hearing from Dr. Grandin directly and firsthand. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Grandin.
Great to be here. I'll make sure I have the slide changer. One thing I really liked in the movie is they put all my projects in there. That part of it's accurate. I think that's really important. Now, this is my grandfather's patent. He was the co-inventor of the autopilot sensor for airplanes. And he did it with another person named Andrew Nikian, I don't know if I'm saying the name right, who was probably autistic, who came up with this crazy idea for little magnetic coils. And then my grandfather had to tinker and make it work. This is an example of different kinds of minds working together. And they worked on it in the loft over this, where they fixed trains. And sometimes it seemed to work and sometimes it didn't. And they finally figured out the big trains going underneath the workbench completely messed up the magnetic field. And they had to tinker, they had to work on it. I used to ask my grandfather endless science questions. Why is the sky blue? Why is grass green? How do tide gates work? And one of the big problems we have today, kids aren't doing enough real activities. We need to get them back in there, doing things with real tools. I went to this fabulous little kindergarten about a year ago where kids were making 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds making robots out of broken computer parts. And then he said, can we hook it up to the charger? Is it going to work and walk? I don't think so. But you got them doing tools. We've got a whole lot of kids today growing up totally separated from doing things with their hands. Big mistake. Now, this is one of my hand-done drawings, a curved cattle handling facility. And you might wonder why the curves. As the cattle come on around the bend, they think they're going back to where they came from. That's a natural behavior of cattle. You can use it. And I love the fact that the movie actually had my real drawings in it. Now, why do I have you need to touch to perceive? Well, I watched the meat industry, I've been in it for 44 years, go from hand drafting to computers. And in the mid-90s, when this was going on, we got weird mistakes on drawings. Like the center of the circle wasn't in the center of the circle. I got these mistakes from every major meat company. And when I looked into who was drawing these drawings, it was somebody who had never built anything and they'd never drawn by hand. They were not seeing the drawings. It's that simple. And we got to get them out doing things. Man, I went to go down to Cape Kennedy. I got to see a SpaceX launch. It was like so cool. That was a totally geek out. And I did model rockets as a young child, and here's the real thing. I learned that a person with Tourette's syndrome worked on designing this launch pad. Well, doing things. You can buy the rockets pre-made today. That's not the point. And the only places I was not bullied and teased as a child was the shared interests. Things like riding horses, model rockets, and electronics. Now, I get asked all the time, how did I get into my interest in cattle? I have no background in it. I was introduced to them as a teenager. This brings up a really important thing about careers. Students get interested in things they get exposed to. Find out what they like. They might also find out stuff they don't like. There's the rocket taking off. And this is my little bird kite that's in Calling All Minds. I had to tinker and tinker and tinker to get it to work. And I couldn't get the same kind of paper I had as a child. Now, you notice it's got little wingtips, just like modern jets. I should have patented that when I was 7 years old. And the rough surface of the paper probably had something to do with why it worked, because golf balls fly better when they're rough. Couldn't get the same paper. So there's a wingtip there, first generation wingtip for fuel saving. All right, there's something fancier. And there's blended winglet. And the patents are really fun. They're so simple that children can understand these patents. They simply are shapes. And then you can go completely nuts and come up with that, and that's just totally weird. One private jet ended up with that. And then you might wonder why the back end of the jet engine is scalloped. It makes it quieter. Really fun things. So simple, children can understand it. Top aviation patents. Another project I did when I was in high school was the Ames distorted room illusion. The movie showed that. And my science teacher wasn't going to tell me how to do it. He wanted me to figure it out for myself. Kids are too scared of making mistakes today. They got to get back and learn how to tinker. And he gave me one hint. This is from the title of the movie. You can see the trapezoidal shape. He showed it very briefly to me out of a textbook, but then he wanted me to figure it out. We got to get these classes back in the schools. If I hadn't had sewing and woodworking and art, I would have hated school. I'm seeing too many smart kids getting shunted into special ed, and they're going absolutely nowhere. I looked at a lot of the models here. When the patent office first started, the visual thinkers, they were probably the geeks and the misfits, made those things. Started out with total visual thinking. Theater, another good field. That's not going to get replaced by artificial intelligence. We got to get this stuff back. Now, around in this part of the country, I think they're doing a better job on skilled trades than some of the other states. I'm seeing a lot of grandparents coming up to me, and they're finding out they're either autistic, dyslexic, or some other kind of a problem, and they find out when the kids are diagnosed. But they have good jobs because they learned how to work. I'm seeing too many smart kids getting babied and becoming their label. I'm really happy to see all the people that are different you're hiring here. That is really, really good. Okay, brain variability. A brain can be more thinking, or a brain can be more social emotional. You know, a little bit of autism gives you things like iPhones, computers, the electric light. Thomas Edison was probably autistic. He was labeled a hyperactive, addled high school dropout. And here's a mind blower of a paper, genomic trade-offs. Are autism and schizophrenia the steep price for human brain? The same genes that make us human with a gigantic brain, the same genes give you autism and schizophrenia. Now, the thing I want to ask you is, what would happen to some of today's top innovators? Some of the people you have here in the Patent Hall of Fame. Edison, hyperactive high school dropout. Einstein probably would be labeled autistic today, no speech until age 3. Steve Jobs was bullied in school, and he was an artist. Then how about Tesla, who developed the alternating current and the power plant? What would happen to them today? And I'm seeing too many kids getting various labels, and I'm worried about them getting screened out. I also see too many parents overprotecting kids, where they're getting so overprotected, they're not learning any basic skills. How about dyslexia in business? JetBlue, the only airline that gives you space in the back of the plane. And ADHD, there's a good chance he's a visual thinker. He knows it's like it's stuffed in the back of a plane. And the head of IKEA being dyslexic. Thomas Edison, there's his patent. He probably had autism. I've read some biographies on him. And what are some of the common denominators of some of these different kinds of minds? Growing up with lots of books. Loved books as a kid. I loved reading. I was slow to learn reading. Mother taught me with phonics. There's other kids that are going to learn whole word. Don't get hung up on just one method of teaching reading. But the other thing is learning how to work. Edison had a paper route at 11, and he was a telegraph operator at 14. So what can we do today to teach work skills? How about volunteer jobs? Churches, synagogues, whatever, volunteer jobs, walking dogs for the neighbors. They got to start learning how to do things on a schedule outside the home. And I had some great mentors. My mother always encouraged my ability in art. I had a great science teacher, and he was always encouraging me to do lots of different projects. And he got me going because then education became a pathway to a goal. I was a troubled student, got kicked out of 9th grade for fighting, went away to a boarding school for kids with problems, and for the first 3 years I ran their horse barn, and I didn't do one little lick of studying, but I learned how to work. The other thing is, they absolutely wouldn't let me become a recluse in my room. And kids today are also way too afraid of making mistakes. Well, that's the closest, books I could find online that were similar to the books that I had as a child that I just loved. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and craft hobby compared to other scientists. This is another reason for keeping all of these hands-on kinds of classes in the schools. Now, this is one of my most important slides. This is the different kinds of minds. Now, when I first started out in my work with livestock, I didn't know I was a visual thinker. I thought everybody was a visual thinker. And over the years, I've been learning more and more about how different people think differently. Everything I think about is a photo. The movie showed that absolutely accurately. Like they were just showing it in the lobby and pictures of shoes coming up. That's how I think. Can't do algebra. And I'm seeing this as a giant obstacle for a lot of kids, and they're going to end up in the basement playing video games. And I worked with a lot of skilled tradespeople on building these big, complicated plants. Don't worry, I won't show you any slaughter stuff. I'm going to just show you some new construction stuff. But people tend to stick up their nose at skilled trades. And we've got water systems around the country falling apart. I stayed in 4 hotels in the last year where the water system failed. And one of the big messes, we almost had to do a conference with porta potties at a very nice hotel in a major city. Now, another kind of mind is the mathematical mind. Think patterns. They don't think in pictures. They think in patterns. Now, the correct scientific names for these different thinkers is object visualizer. And most of the scale models I've seen around here, those kind of inventions would have been done by object visualizers. And things like some of the electronic stuff now and programming stuff, that's going to be more of the pattern thinkers. And I do have a book called The Autistic Brain, where I give you the science to show you that what I'm telling you is not rubbish. Then you got verbal thinkies. And education is getting taken over by the verbal thinkers. They tend to overgeneralize about things. And then you've got the person who's great in sales, he's dyslexic, and he's an auditory learner. But these different kinds of minds really exist, and we need to work on having them work together. And I got to do some brain scans and to find out that, yep, I got a big visual thinking circuit. And I get asked all the time, how do you tell what kind of a thinker a person is? The art minds, the visual thinkers, they'll do a lot of drawing. And my ability in drawing was really encouraged from an early age. The mathematicians are going to be good at math. Then they need to give them harder math. Don't make them do the baby stuff. And there's some more visual thinking stuff. And where I had a problem is I have no working memory. And so a person that has a bad working memory, what you've got to do, if any task that involves a sequence, is give them a pilot's checklist. Okay, if there's some procedure for patents they got to do, they start out, just give them a checklist, bullet points of what the next step is to jog the memory. Also, multitasking can be a problem. And this is what Thomas Edison had to say about mathematicians. He said, I'm not a mathematician, I can always hire some, but they can't hire me. That's what Thomas Edison had to say. And there's a book, The Autistic Brain, another book on dyslexia and visual thinking. And I'm getting worried that we're not valuing visual thinking enough. I checked out a lot of those models. Early patent office was all the visual thinking, kind of really clever mechanical engineering. And I'm worried that our educational system's screening us out. And we need our visual thinkers to prevent messes like Fukushima. You know why it happened? They put the emergency equipment in a non-waterproof basement. You know, electrically operated pump doesn't work too well underwater. How about some watertight doors? Now that's something so basic, but what I've learned is the mathematical mind doesn't see it. When I was younger, I used to call it stupidity. It's not stupidity. They simply don't see it. We need them in science. There's been a lot of problems with replicating scientific results. Slight differences in the methods can totally change cancer research, whether you shook the cells or you just gently stirred them. So when I review journal articles, I go over the methods. I'll let somebody else do the statistics, but I really get after the methods. Tell me what breed of cattle you used in your study. And then in my book, Calling All Minds, I've got Grace Murray Hopper in there, and she was terrible at Latin. A lot of minds that are different have uneven skills. Good at one thing, bad at something else. We need to be having a lot more emphasis on building up the thing that the person is good at, that you can turn into a career. I think in education, we need to be looking a lot more at where's a student 10 years after high school? I was doing those DipFat projects that were shown in the movie, 10 years after high school. And Stephen Hawking was doing math in his head, Penrose geometry. You want to find cool stuff for kids to do in math? Type mathematical terms into Google. Images, use the image function Type in things like fractals, quasi-crystalline graphene, all kinds of stuff. You'll find some great stuff you won't find in the word Google. And I liked what Stephen Hawking had to say about disability. Concentrate on the things your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. And he could do geometry in his head. He could not write. It had to be all done in his head. He also was really good at floating around in the weightless plane and having a really fun time doing it. Visual thinkers, artificial intelligence, people with autism and dyslexia were bottom-up thinkers. So when I started working on a piece of equipment I developed, the double rail restrainer system, the thing I wished I'd patented, I built upon some previous work that is patented that was done at the University of Connecticut. And what they did when they started on their project was they searched all the patents, and it was a real pain back in the 70s, to look at the state of the art so they didn't reinvent the wheel. And they showed that straddling a conveyor was a real low-stress way of handling an animal. I saved their plywood model from the dump, and my job was to make it work in a plant. So it was sort of like my grandfather working with Andrew Nikian on the autopilot. And I did have 2 patentable things on it, which I'm kicking myself I didn't patent, but they are in an article that I did for the International Journal of Agricultural Engineering Research in the late 80s, came out with that article. And I had to invent an adjustable side thing, that was patented, and part of the entrance would have been patented. Also, I was shocked to learn about 2 years ago that a simple artificial intelligence system that diagnoses melanoma uses a bottom-up approach. You show it lots of pictures of melanomas, lots of pictures of other kinds of stuff on the skin, and it learns to categorize. See, people with autism, I'm a bottom-up thinker. And so you take the kid that's different and you get them out doing things that fills the database full of information. And then they get less autistic as they learn more and more bottom-up. And there's the iPhone app right there. Ultimate bottom-up thinking. We're not making any hypothesis up front. We're using patient-derived data to make the hypothesis. That's how I think. When I first started working on cattle handling facilities, I went around to every single feed yard in Arizona and I worked cattle. And there were some curved facilities. I can't take credit for inventing that concept. What I did do is combine a lot of bits together to come up with better systems. Throw out the bad things that don't work, take the good bits, and put them together. And it helped me in my animal behavior, because some of the first work I did in animal behavior is to look at what cattle were looking at. And at this time in the 70s, I didn't know I was a visual thinker. I just thought everybody was a visual thinker. I didn't know. Until one day I asked the speech therapist, think about a church steeple, how does it come into your mind? And I was shocked that she saw this vague pointy thing. My mind names them off. That was my first inkling that maybe I thought differently. So I looked at little things that would make cattle balk. And there are eclipse shadows. I try to train students to be a better observer. That's on the sidewalk at our university. I watched hundreds of students walk over this. I didn't know that eclipses did this with the trees, but I noticed these shadows. And I still have to talk to people about chains hanging down, little yellow tape that's spooking the cattle, little things we tend to not notice, they notice. I always get asked, do they know they're going to get slaughtered? I've been in 3 different places where a paper towel hanging down like this was stopping the animals. Little visual distractions. I still have to talk about these things. I have whole checklists I give people on this stuff now. And non-slip flooring is super important. Now let's see how we are on perceiving things. Raise your hand if you saw that that animal was looking at the sunbeam. Well, we're doing about moderate, a little bit better than the mathematicians at another place I went to. The school administrators were the worst. Now, I show this to elementary school kids, over half the hands go up. They will see the steer is looking at the sunbeam. And animal memories are specific because they're sensory-based. You want to understand animals. It's a sensory-based world. What are they seeing, hearing, touching, smelling? It is not word-based. Early exposure to queer interests, riding horses, learning carpentry, lots of hands-on things. That's how I got interested in livestock. Exposure as a teenager. And when you're weird, how do you sell yourself when you're weird? When you're super weird, you got to show your work off. And here's the drawings for the dipping vat system that was depicted in the movie. I love the fact they actually recreated all my projects. I thought that was so cool. And there's my brochure. I sold myself by showing my work. I was living in a student apartment called the Oasis Apartments. So I renamed it the Oasis Building, Suite 218. That sounds a whole lot better than Oasis Apartments, Apartment 218. And here is the original dip vat project I did in 1976. And there's another picture of it right there. And I love the fact that the HBO movie built an exact replica of it. Oh, this was just so cool. The work stuff in there was absolutely correct. Now, I'm starting my career in construction. It was hard being a woman in a man's world, but there were some good people that helped me, and one was a great contractor. And he had seen my drawings, he seeked me out. The other thing I've learned about construction is an urgency. It's about outcomes. You've got to get a job done. And I'm seeing too many kids not learning how to work, and I'll talk to the parents and they go, oh, we're thinking about it. I said, we don't think about it in construction, you got to do. Affects how you look at things. Now let's look at who builds great big huge factories, like great big meat companies at Cargill or Tyson, a Swift plant, any of these kind of places, these big complicated factories. And what I learned is, and I've found this to be true for every major meat company, I've worked for all of them, and one of the big ones I worked for doesn't exist anymore. But the visual thinkers, my department, did all the drafting. We'd lay out the whole entire plant. Also, the visual thinkers invented the clever mechanical equipment. Things like packaging equipment, conveyors, stuff similar to your models. Now, how about our mathematically inclined engineers? We need you too. Boilers, refrigeration, roof trusses, pre-stressed concrete, power, water, soil compaction requirements. You need the whole team. And right now, they're not able to replace the visual thinkers. They're playing video games in the basement. This is the problem. And last year, 2017, I went to 2 brand new pork processing plants. Gorgeous, beautiful, big processing plants. We built the building. We built the cooler room doors. They're too expensive to ship in a container. But a lot of the specialized equipment, the kind of things that would be like your models, we don't make anymore. And one of the reasons for that is taking skilled trade stuff out of the schools and not putting enough value on visual thinking. So we frustrate the kid with the algebra requirement, don't even let them take geometry. So how did I manage to get through college? There was a quirk in the educational system in 1967. And the required class nationally was finite math, which was matrices, statistics, and some probability stuff. A bit more visual, I could understand it. Yeah, you need the whole team. And by the time I got through the second pork processing plant, I was about ready to cry. We don't make it anymore. Yep, our visual thinkers are in the basement, and they're becoming their label. Okay, here is a system that was put in 2017. We still know how to build a beef plant. We're one heart attack away from losing it. There's one company that still does it. Can the son take over the business? I don't know. And this is a center track restrainer system. You can see all the steel work. There's a lot of talented people that worked on that. I like to show this slide off to parents and teachers. I like to call it my heavy metal. And don't stick your nose up at it. There's a lot more stuff in the rest of the plant that's more complicated than this is. This is visual thinking department here. Okay, this is one of my curved lanes coming up to the dip vat. And as the cattle come on around the bend, they think they're going back to where they came from. This is a real tight space layout. I had to lay it out so as the animals enter, if you dead end it, they got to see a place to go. Then you take them around the curve. And here's an aerial view of one of my ranch setups. These are pictures that I used to use in my portfolio. And a lot of parents, when I talk to them about how do you get into the back door of things? How do we get into back doors and find ways into things? There's a scene in the movie where I go up and I get the editor's card. That scene is real and it's very important because I recognized if I started writing for the magazine. So then I produced an article about my thesis work on cattle squeeze chutes, And then I started doing a column for free. Then they started paying me a little bit. It got me a press pass into big, expensive meetings. Writing was another important thing in my career. I wrote about the things that I did in the trade magazines, both nationally and locally. Now, I'm pretty proud of the fact that half the cattle are handled in my center track restrainer system, and I get asked all the time, what do you think changed the industry the most? What changed the industry the most was a scoring system I developed for meat plants. I made the mistake early in my career that I could fix everything with engineering. If I could just build the right engineering, we don't have to have management. The equipment would manage itself. That's not how things work. So I then said, now I used to design hardware, now I'm a software engineer. And I'm going to develop a scoring system. We got to manage the soft stuff that's up in here. And I was hired by McDonald's Corporation to train their food safety auditors how to do it. And in 1999, the year 2000, it made a huge difference. The other thing I saw is when you take the bosses of these big corporations and you yank them out of the office, it's just like that show Undercover Boss. I'll never forget the day when a vice president, high-level vice president at McDonald's saw a half-dead dairy cow go into his product. He goes, oh, wow, we got some things we got to change. And the industry today is so much better than what it was, back in 2000 and 1999. And we were able to make some of the older plants work with simple changes. Non-slip flooring, lighting, because cattle don't like to go into the dark. I practiced reverse conflict of interest. I didn't shove a center track restrainer or a double rail restrainer down their throat. I made whatever they had work. And out of 75 big pork and beef suppliers for McDonald's, only 3 had to build something expensive. Everybody else we fixed with training. 3 plants had to have a manager-ectomy. Nothing worked until we got rid of the plant manager. And then things worked. Now this is my double rail center track restrainer system that I developed for large cattle. And there's an entrance design in there, which I wished I'd patented, which I'm kicking myself right now. And there's adjustable sides in there that definitely were patentable, 2 patentable items. And if I had known that the patents would be so easy that I could take a phone and look up a patent, in the mid-'80s, that was beyond my mildest imagination, that you could have such a thing. But there's the center track restrainer system. I love the fact the movie titles used actual drawings from real jobs in them. I thought that was so cool. Now, this is the scoring system. The trick is you got to figure out what are the important things to measure. And I don't tell you how to build a plant, but these are outcome measures. And the first one is rendering them unconscious on the first shot in the stunner. And if you couldn't shoot 95% on the first shot, you failed the McDonald's audit. It was that simple. And you know what the #1 reason for failing was? Busted equipment. That's management. Now, things are way better now. The USDA has stepped up enforcement a whole lot. But still, maintenance, maintenance, maintenance. And I'll do talks at our NAMI, North American Meat Institute meeting. This scoring system is the heart of our industry trade voluntary guideline. It's being used in other countries, even as a government guideline. Now, it's hard for people sometimes to understand how something this simple could work. You have to figure out what are the critical control points. And I love the critical control point approach that's used in food safety. What is the really important thing? You know what it might be with lettuce? Making sure they got porta potties out in the field. Something people don't want to talk about, but that may be a super important critical control point. And then everything has to be dead when you hang it up. But one of the measures that's not really that intuitive was vocalization. Cattle mooing right when you're handling them. And if they're mooing 99% of the time, and I've got scientific papers, I got a lot of stuff on Google Scholar on this, lots of stuff. And mooing because you're slamming doors on them, you're poking them with prods. And if you're doing a good job, your vocalization score might be 3-4%. You're doing a bad job, it can be 20, 30% falling down. Well, we used to have 10, 15, 20% of the pigs fall down during handling. Well, now it's just about none. Yeah, things have gotten a whole lot better. So these things, you measure these things, and then there were 6 automatic failures, abuses, things like slamming gates on purpose on animals, dragging animals, beating them up. I've got a video, it's kind of funny, where I whack a plastic pig and we talk about when does tapping become beating. Real clear-cut guidelines. Now, it's the same principle as traffic. Traffic rules work pretty well. We're not fighting over there in the court building across the street, anything about traffic rules, that's for sure. So let's just do a little exercise here in critical control points, using traffic as the model. If you could only enforce 3 traffic rules, and these are things that police commonly can enforce, what 3 would you enforce to get the most public safety if you only were allowed to enforce 3? Okay? Speeding, yes, that's one of them. Okay, what's the next one? No, definitely not. Traffic lights, stopping. And then the third one is drunk driving. And what I have found is that almost always comes up last. Texting's going to be 4, and then seat belts for 5. But the reason why I don't put seat belts in the top 3 is they protect me. They don't protect you against me. Okay, I want to try to get you understanding what are the important things. I can't stand bureaucracy. When I first came to CSU, somebody from the provost office put a sign up in my office that said administratium, the heaviest element known to science. And it reacts with absolutely nothing because it's inert. That's administratium. But figuring out what are the important things. And it worked just beautifully. They had to make certain scores. 1% on falling, that's all you were allowed, anywhere in the whole facility. Now, it could be rough handling, or it could be slippery floors. And this worked really, really well. And when I first started in 1996, the USDA hired me to collect baseline data, and only 30% of the plants could shoot 95% on the first shot because everything was busted. Then we get McDonald's in there. Look at the big improvement. I don't have any more recent data because the lawyers got involved in it, and I can't get the data anymore. You know, leave it to the legal department and mess up everything. Now, when I learned that I think differently, that gave me a lot of insight. The first step that people have to do is learn that there are different kinds of minds and figure out how they complement each other. Take Steve Jobs with the iPhone. He was an artist. And then he had to have engineers and mathematicians to make the phone work. But if the engineers had designed that phone, it would have been so complicated and nobody could have used the phone. That's an example of the different minds working together. And the first step is recognizing that different people are good at things. I've had students who were super good at running the computer, super good at running the experiments, but they get lost in the math and forget about the cattle. I was looking at a book on cattle breeding just the other day that was all mathematical. Well, you go crazy just selecting for production traits in cattle, you're going to get foot and leg problems. Well, did you see any cattle in the middle of those numbers? Yep, and I was the one that would start to say, hey, we're getting collapsed ankles, we're getting post-legged, we're getting twisted feet. Yeah, we better do something about this. You see, they don't see it. And we got to make sure that educators don't screen out the different kinds of minds. Now, they wanted me to leave lots of time for questions. Maybe I'm finished up early, I don't know. But we're now going to do questions, and thank you for coming.
All right, great. So we'll start. No, you can go ahead and sit.
Okay, I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to sit or stand.
We'll sit, we'll converse. I'll start with a couple of questions, and then we'll leave plenty of time for audience questions. So folks, start thinking about questions. There are mics in the audience. You can line up. There are 3 mics here. But let me just get this going. So talk a little bit about, so I've noticed a common trend among inventors is perseverance.
Yes, that's important.
Inventors just never give up in the face of failure. talk about failures you've encountered, how have you overcome them, and are you afraid of failure?
Well, when I was making my little bird kite, I experimented with it, taping adhesive tape. I had two kinds of tape when I was a little kid. I had half-inch adhesive tape and cellophane tape. So I'd experiment with different ways of folding the wings and bending the wings. I had a little parachute, and I experimented with different ways to fix it so the strings wouldn't tangle. You know, that's perseverance. Of course, Edison said it's 1% inspiration, I think it was, and 99% perspiration. And I had a project fail in 1980, and I learned a real lesson from it. That's when I got over thinking engineering can solve all the problems. You know, in education, they'll go, we give every kid a laptop, that totally fixes education. It doesn't. That doesn't replace teaching. And it was an old plant, and it's been torn down now, where pigs had to walk up to the 3rd floor, and they hired me to build a conveyor to take the pigs up there. Well, they sat down on it and flipped over backwards. And I had to supervise cutting that thing up with torches. And that was a very depressing, very unhappy time. But I learned a really important thing of looking at root causes of problems. You don't fix pig genetics with conveyors. That's something that should have been fixed with breeding. You see, you've got to figure out the root cause of a problem. And it also got me out of the mode of thinking I could replace management with engineering. You can't.
How do we teach children not to be afraid of failure?
They need to be doing a lot of projects. I could get my book, Calling All Minds, and they're going to have to tinker with that bird kite to get it to work because I couldn't buy the same rough surface art paper, or at least I couldn't buy it easily. I wasn't going to tell people to go to weird websites. You know, they need to just go to easy stuff. And file folders don't work quite the same way as rough surface art paper, because that rough surface affects aerodynamics. They might have to put some masking tape on it or something to roughen the surface. They're going to have to experiment. I experimented for hours with it.
Yeah. Okay, let's begin by going to the audience. Sir.
Hi. Okay, I'll just speak up. Okay, my name is Benjamin. Oh, what? Okay, good. I'm autistic. I just want to say that you're my mom's hero. You're awesome. And I'm really into movie.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm really into movie making in the movie industry. I'm into
Okay.
portrayals of different types of people, different types of minds. I'm really fascinated with, like, recently the Fantastic Beasts movies. The new character of Newt Scamander, who the actor Eddie Redmayne confirmed that he's on the Asperger's spectrum. My question to you is...
Well, there's lots of people in that field that are on the spectrum. Half of Silicon Valley's on the spectrum,
Oh, yeah.
and they've avoided the labels.
Yeah.
And the thing is, autism is an important part of who I am.
Yeah.
But being a professor and a designer comes first.
Yeah.
In the movie, I had those cattle pins. So even back when I was in my 20s, the cattle came first.
Oh. So, yeah, and also in that movie, because it takes place in the 1920s, it was before autism was properly diagnosed, so nobody really treats him as such. My question is, what things in the movies would you want to see as far as portrayals of people in autism or in the neurodivergent minds?
Well, I'd like to show the things we can do. I think the emphasis needs to be on what we can do. I really love Stephen Hawking's quote, concentrate on the things your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. Now, things involving memory. Okay, for me, it's visual thinking. For some other kid, it's going to be programming and math. But those abilities have to be developed. The kid's not going to learn programming if nobody exposes them to it. There's a huge need for programmers right now. There's also a huge need for skilled trades. Good jobs that are not going to get replaced, that ought to get a lot more respect. And I got that respect by, working on these big, giant factories for like 7 or 8 major companies.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am, on the left.
Thank you. You gave wonderful advice and insight about how education could be changed to better serve children. Do you have any words on how adults who were not diagnosed as children but who are finding out as adults, how they can have a better quality of life and productivity?
Well, I've got a book called Different Not Less. You can pick it up online. Different Not Less. It's 14 older people, all employed, from low-level jobs to high-level programmer and doctors and veterinarian type of jobs. And where the diagnosis helped was on their relationships. But I am seeing too many kids that are smart where it's holding them back. They aren't learning skills. Driving. That's going to take longer. I was very lucky that on my aunt's ranch, her mailbox was 3 miles away on a dirt road. So by the end of the summer, I had 200 miles driving under my belt before doing traffic. But spend more time in totally safe places like giant parking lots. Then you start doing some suburban, very, very easy traffic, maybe early in the morning, Sunday when the roads are deserted. And then you do the driver's ed. Because if I hadn't learned to drive, I would not have been able to have done any of my livestock stuff.
Thank you.
Although with self-driving vehicles coming up, who knows if
Well,
that's going to be
yeah,
needed anymore.
that would solve that problem, but they're not quite here yet.
Right. Ma'am?
Hi. So we tend to have a lot of labels and perhaps put individuals in buckets. But now I'm starting to see where we're sort of acknowledging that instead of everyone being on one extreme or the other, there may be a bit of a spectrum.
Oh, autism is total spectrum, because a brain can be more thinking or a brain can be more social emotional. One just geeky become a little bit autistic. And you see, the other problem is that doctors keep changing the guidelines. Nobody's doing that with tuberculosis. You either got tuberculosis or you don't have it. And I'm seeing what drives me crazy is I go back and forth between the silos. Like I come here, go to NASA, go out to Silicon Valley, go back onto one of my jobs, and working with some of the skilled tradespeople I worked with that are all retiring and they can't replace. In certain parts of the country, it's a real problem. We need all the different kinds of minds.
So I was wondering, like, when we have the titles visual thinker and spatial thinker, can you be a strong combination of both, meaning maybe you're more
There
evenly...
are some people that kind of are both. You see, the thing is, when you get a label, you tend to have a bigger divergence between the thing you're good at and the thing that you are bad at. There are some people that kind of are able to do both. They're kind of mixtures. But the super visual thinkers and the super mathematicians usually don't do both.
Okay.
If they're really extreme on one of those traits.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, one thing you've said in your book is that it's not necessarily that one is better than the other. It's that on an innovative team, you are best if you have all sorts of thinkers, right?
You need them all, because my kind of mind is going to touch refrigeration or the boilers, and we got to have that, and we got to make sure the plant's got a good foundation and the building doesn't fall down. You see, you need to have the whole. You need the whole team, and in some, in the meat industry, I would say we're very democratic. Everybody has a junkie office in the boiler room in my industry. But I have gone to other places, and I think I'll leave the names out since we're recording things, where the engineers get the fancy offices in the tower, and my department's down in the tunnel with the cable trays. And we don't belong there. You're not going to have some of these projects without us. Every time I see cable trays now, they make me mad. I went to a place about 4 years ago.
Sir.
But everybody has a bad office that shakes and is noisy and everything else, and the meatpacking plant is right next to a bunch of real noisy equipment that runs the plant.
But that's probably where the work gets done anyway. So.
Oh yeah, the drafting gets done there, the welding gets done there, and the math gets done there too, and the offices are all horrible. We're very democratic in the meat industry on our engineering teams and drafting teams.
Great.
Other industries, that's not necessarily the case.
Sir.
Hi. I'm an artist basically who works here at the USPTO, and I was diagnosed with ADHD late in life. Anyway.
What do you do here?
I actually did this.
You're a patent examiner?
No,
He did your card.
Oh, you made the trading cards. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Anyway, wow. My son, and most people don't know this, is autistic. And
How old is he?
4.
Fourth grade?
Literally
Four,
4.
a little kid.
We basically,
Well, this is the problem. When the kids are really little, there's some that really look really bad. I looked horrible as a little kid, completely horrible. And this is why it's so important to do early intervention, try to get him talking. The other thing you need to do with your 4-year-old, always give him a chance to use his words. Give him time to respond. He's going to be like a phone on one bar. When he makes a mistake, like putting his fingers in the mashed potatoes, calmly give him the instruction instead of screaming no. And the other thing is teaching turn-taking. When I was 4, that was taught to me with board games. These kids have got to learn how to wait and take their turn. That's super important right now at age 4.
Thank you.
And I do have a book, The Way I See It, you might want to pick up.
But here's my question. I found out that basically a lot of what I call the gatekeepers are not visual thinkers,
Wait a
right?
minute, I can't.
The people who make the decision makers are, in other words, if I propose a project or an idea.
I'm having trouble. For some reason, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Sorry, can you hear me better?
Yeah, that's a lot
great.
better.
One of the things I've noticed specifically is that for visual thinkers, it's kind of hard to make themselves understood.
Hard to do what?
Like now. Basically explaining themselves. And for example, I noticed that in a lot of public schools here in Arlington, when they're teaching the arts, they're doing it wrong. And they're teaching it more like arts and crafts in terms of as a profession that could be taught.
I
And
still don't understand what you're trying to,
the question is,
and I'm having trouble hearing for some reason.
and it's kind of ironic,
Okay.
it's,
I'll emphasize in a second.
sorry.
Yeah.
How do you make yourself understood?
How do I make, well, what I did, one thing that helped me, when I went to school, the teachers marked up my writing and corrected my grammar, just red marking it up. We're having a lot of problems now with graduate students, and I've talked to professors all over the country about this. Writing skills are atrocious, and part of the reason is nobody marked up and copy edited that work. I mean, I've sat on flights and corrected journal articles for like 9th grade English, and I don't know what they're teaching in school. Maybe they teach them how to pass tests, but the writing skills are terrible. And one of the things that helped me was writing. The other thing is a visual thinker tends to ramble. And if I don't have slides, what I have to do is give myself a checklist with bullet points of each, almost like a list of my slides. And then I can talk down that list. And when I did my book, Thinking in Pictures, Betsy Lerner, my editor, about ripped her hair out. And she didn't do any line editing. I was fine on that, but she moved a lot of chunks around. And you have to stop the rambling. And the way to do that is make a really tight outline. I don't do more than one double-spaced page without having a subject header. Because you've got to stop the rambling. See, visual thinking is associative. Okay, like today I saw the shoe pictures coming up in the lobby of thinking about shoes, and that Ked high top came up. Well, I didn't have Ked high tops, but I had a white sneaker when I was a kid. And now I'm riding my bike wearing that white sneaker. You see how there's an associative link. Now I'm putting playing cards in the spokes to make my bike sound like a motorcycle. That was a big thing in the 50s. But you see how it's an associative link. You see, and when I explain how that works, that makes sense. How did I get from a sneaker to a bike? I'm now seeing that white sneaker, it's actually a dirty white sneaker now, on the pedal of my bike.
Thank you. Sir.
Yes, Dr. Grandin, my question is, what strategies did your teachers and family use for you to become comfortable in with social interactions?
Oh, you got to make them do it. Okay, the thing that was done, I think one of the reasons why the grandparents have jobs and Junior doesn't. Grandparents were taught social rules, and my generation was taught social rules in a much more structured way. And a common thing in my generation that was done in our neighborhoods, when as soon as kids were about 7 years old, when the family had a party, you had to put your good clothes on, greet the guests, take their coat, serve them the snacks. Obviously, we did not serve the alcohol. And that taught social skills. You were taught how to shake hands, how to stand, how to do it. That was done much more structured way in the 50s. I was raised in the Northeast. And the other thing is teachable moments. When social mistakes are made, they're corrected. The other thing is, no matter where I went, grown-ups corrected children. Like if I was messing up something in a store, the clerks said you can only touch the stuff you're going to buy. They would give the instruction. And so I think some of this is 50s upbringing. Now, I walked out of my very first talk that I did in graduate school, so I learned to have really good slides. Or I've got to have really good notes with bullet points. So if I panic, I can go back to those notes that will trigger my memory. You got to do it. That's what you got to do.
Thank you.
And you need to be coached like you're in a foreign country. On that construction project that I showed, the Swift 1974, I criticized some welding, and I said it looked like a pigeon doo-dooed on it. That's not very socially acceptable. So Harley, the engineer, pulled me into his office. He's the engineer, and it was in the boiler room where the office was. And he quietly told me that I need to apologize for the rude talk. And Whitey, the welder, was in the cafeteria, and I had to go up and apologize. And he also told me that Whitey was his employee, and I should have come to him if I didn't like the welding. So he explained two things. Just explained really calmly what I should do. He handled it absolutely perfectly.
Stay on that side. You want to
Okay.
ask your question?
Oh, hello. I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Gordon Liu. I am somewhat on the very mild side of autism, so I'm super mild. I have some forms like I can relate to monopolizing a conversation and talking on and on and on.
Do you work here? Or?
I'm a student at George Mason University.
And what are you studying at George Mason?
History. My
Now, the
dad.
other thing I want to recommend, you got to learn how to work. I made a slow transition from the world of school to the world of work. And but when you graduate from George Mason, I want you to have had some internships under your belt, some jobs under your belt, because you've got to learn how to do tasks for the deadlines. You've got to be there on time. Super important. When I was 13, my mother got me a sewing job. When I was 15 and I went away to the special school, I ran the horse barn for 3 years. I didn't do one drop of studying, but they made me go to classes, go to meals, because they absolutely were not going to allow me to become a recluse in my room. Absolutely not allowed. And we can't be allowing these kids to get addicted to video games because they're having really bad outcomes. So we got to start thinking about, you're studying history, what you might want to do when you graduate, and try to get internships in that, or just get a job somewhere that doesn't have too much multitasking. I don't want to stick you in a clothing store at Christmas rush. That's too hectic. Or McDonald's lunch rush. Too much multitasking, too hectic. But I'd strongly recommend each summer you get a job. I think that's really, really important because my mother put internships together for me before there were internships. I worked in a research lab with pharmaceutical experiments on mice. I worked as an aide for an autistic kid. Then I was going out to my aunt's ranch. And I'd been out to my aunt's ranch for a couple of years. Then my mother says, well, we got to start doing something else. So we'll do half the summer at Aunt's Ranch and half the summer at the research lab. So you're always stretching, always doing stuff.
Okay, if you can ask your question quickly, and then that's going to be, unfortunately, the last question from the audience, given our time.
Okay.
So go ahead.
All right, so how can you avoid misunderstanding other people? Because sometimes I misunderstand like fellow college students and other people, and sometimes I get upset because I just misunderstand and misinterpret it. So how can I avoid misinterpreting people?
Well, first of all, everything you learn will be specific exam. Okay, so when Harley told me about the pigeon doo-doo thing, I learned not to criticize in a bad way like that. I go to the boss of that employee if I don't like the work. You see, now that's something I could then start to generalize, and he handled it absolutely perfectly. But the thing is, it's learning specific examples. It's just like how an AI system works, how the most basic AI systems work, is specific examples are put in categories. So how did I learn that cats weren't dogs? Well, I first sorted them by size when I was a little kid. Then the neighbor's got a dachshund. Well, can't sort by size anymore. So I had to find sensory-based features that dachshunds shared with big dogs. Barking, the shape of the nose, and their smell. Those were features that the little dachshund barked like a dog. She didn't meow like a cat. But the more stuff you get out and do, the more you learn. It's sort of like you fill the database up, and then you got to relate back to something in the database. That's exactly how my mind works. It's also how AI works, which I've only learned that a couple of years ago. It is the autistic brain in silicon.
Okay, let me thank you very much. Since we are at the PTO, I want to finish quickly on innovation. In your book, Calling All Minds, you say, if you've ever wondered how America has been at the forefront of so much innovation, part of the answer is the very freedom our country is founded on, which includes the freedom to invent, to market those inventions, and to protect the inventor's ideas.
Well, it's really important to protect ideas. Now, on the other hand, you can get to the point where you're making little kind of nitpicking things, and I think it's very interesting when I look at the models. Those are all visual thinking types of inventors. And as a visual thinker, there's some patents out there, especially some of this design stuff. I don't think I'll go into any specific information, but I think they're just things for lawyers to send out cease and desist letters and actually hold back innovation. You know, things like my grandfather's patent, some of the 2 items I had on the center track restrainer, I should have patented that, but I would have public domained it anyway. I just would have liked to have had the publication of the patent. But yeah, you've got to protect it or people won't innovate. But on the other hand, I remember reading in the history of patents, they were giving some examples years ago of things that aren't patentable, like slight changes on playing cards was one of the things. I was in the hotel and I'm going, what if I put a scalloped edge on this mirror? That patentable is kind of silly. And novel and non-obvious. And a little holder they have in the airplanes now to hold your tablet or to hold your iPad. The 2 different airlines have 2 different ones. I'd consider those things patentable. They're very clever. You know, that kind of stuff. But
the models Dr. Grandin is talking about are upstairs, actually even downstairs.
Yeah.
They're throughout the building. They're from the 1800s. They're real models from the 1800s. Inventors back then had to submit them to the patent office so that examiners could actually look and touch them while they were examining. We don't require that anymore, obviously.
But the other thing is that sometimes very basic foundation patents are simple. I remember years ago reading an article in a magazine about the Xerox machine, and that basically, this would have been back in the 60s, they patented the use of selenium on the drum, selenium in the copying process, or the needle with the eye next to the point for a sewing machine. And these are things where you can't design around it. It's so basic. Sometimes the very simple things are difficult to think up. And I go back to my grandfather's invention. Actually, it's a very simple device. And I'll just finish up that in the 70s, I went to the Sperry Rand Corporation that makes it. And some engineer goes, oh, simple little flux valves. And he kind of like, you know, stuck his nose up at it. And I got really mad. And I said, those simple things were not easy to think up. I'll end with that.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Grandin.